So I'd like to end the session looking at patient pathways to access. Aneb, have patients approached you? I think you've kind of already touched on this in terms of looking to seek unlicensed medication for early access. And how do you approach that discussion in terms of, you know, as we've talked about managing expectations? So how do you as a medical professional guide those conversations and work with them to come up with a solution to that?
So I was approached by some patients or parents of patients. There's a drug in Germany which is not licensed in Europe, but it's licensed in the US, and it was imported via Sweden. It's not licensed in Sweden, and this went well for some time. The patients got the drug. And then at some stage, regulatory bodies in Germany, they recognized that this drug was not licensed in Sweden and was legally not allowed to be imported to Germany to the patients. And then all by a sudden, the supply chain stopped and the patients were without drug. And so this was quite a critical situation for the patients. So we then found out that there's some pharmacy in the Netherlands that produces it, that the pharmacist does it himself without any pharmaceutical company. And some people or some patients, they took this drug, but for others it was not possible because they had to pay themselves and they couldn't afford it. And so this was quite a difficult situation, and we discussed it also with the pharmaceutical company who wanted to establish an agent in Germany, but this of course took some time, and then some patients were really desperate, and their parents wrote to the local newspaper. And then also the Ministry of Health in Lower Saxony or county or state, they approached the parents and said that they didn't understand the problem. And so I went with them to the Ministry of Health, and they were quite receptive, and they said that there could be an exemption for a limited period of time until this issue of importing the drug is solved. And so the patients on a named patient basis, they were then allowed to import the drug again. And so we could bridge this period. But this was quite difficult for the families.
Is that quite reflective of the type of hurdles that you would have to go through on a patient-by-patient basis, or would you say that generally the German health authorities are quite receptive to these programs?
Well, I think by and large they're quite receptive, but this also depends on the local people. So this was an initiative of the Secretary of State, the local, who then contacted the patient groups. But this does not happen everywhere, and also not on the federal level. So you can't say in general that the authorities are receptive, but they have, of course, realized that there are many people with rare diseases which have serious and comprehensive unmet needs, and they have also installed some agencies who will care for people with rare diseases or will facilitate research and development of drugs for rare diseases. But of course this is a complex problem, complex issue, which also involves many stakeholders, and so there is progress in the development and supply of medication, also in the context of early access programs from the government, but still there are considerable unmet needs which exist and do impede the use of early access programs.
Yeah. And not without significant emotional toll for the families, really, that kind of journey of it's happening, it's not happening, having to fight for it. You know, that's a real emotional process to go through, isn't it? That uncertainty. Yes. Like that. Yeah, absolutely. And Dawn, based on your experience, you know, is that sort of typical geographically, would you say that countries' authorities are usually willing to work with physicians in this way to secure access for individual patients?
In my experience, I would say yes, most are willing to work with physicians on this type of program, this type of access. And for the most part, I would say most of these competent authorities will understand the sense of urgency as well, depending on the indication that is being evaluated and the drug that needs to be used, and will do their best to try to facilitate and expedite process where they can. Some countries are very rigid. And to the emotional roller coaster, we have had some experiences where it's taken 18 months to 2 years before an approval would come through for access. But you don't give up. That goes back to the ethics question. You don't give up. And so you keep doing what you can, but a lot of it as well, and I find depends on that healthcare physician who is willing to continue to have that conversation and keep approaching their authority, their regulatory body, and keep, I think Dave and Roberta both said, keep approaching them, and that can be tiring and emotional as well for the HCP, the healthcare professional who's involved, and so you have to keep encouraging them. Offer, and as a company, offering your medical team to be able to answer questions for that competent authority, for that regulatory agencies, because yes, we're here, that continuous support. And I've experienced that the agencies, wherever they may be, are willing to talk and ask questions as well, because they know that door is open.
No,
but
yeah, encouraging at least. If we consider the lived experience, Roberta, and it talked there about people having to go to the press and kind of having to fight that fight, but what have you seen rare disease patients and caregivers have to do to be able to do this? What lengths and strengths are they going to achieve this?
There is such a spectrum of desperation, and I've seen so many different types. Just working in the medical field alone, I recall a patient who had a rare skin condition, traveled outside of the country to get a cream that was not available in the US. And when they were no longer able to travel, they purchased every ingredient on that cream to make it themselves. And that can be very dangerous in terms of what we see now in our rare disease community in the drug development process, not yet reaching certain countries. Of course, there's always people wanting to travel out to try to bring it back. There's sometimes limited quantity that they could bring back, or they're not able to at all. This also extends out into their friends and family in other countries that perhaps they could get it sent to them. We have seen long chains of people try to connect through different countries. A friend of a friend of a friend has picked up a medication at a pharmacy and tried to get it to the border for each one. But we've also seen a lot of attempts at smuggling. We have a lot of that throughout South America, for example. Patients are desperate and they will travel to another country and try to smuggle that in. But we also see people trying to come into other countries illegally to get it. Emotionally, people are losing their homes, their livelihoods, in order to pay for medications that they would not be able to afford otherwise if their insurance is covering them, which we see quite often. The affordability is crazy. There are gouges as well, but when the family is just so consumed with grief and desperation, sometimes they cannot go to work themselves. It emotionally stunts them. But then you have others who sell everything. They sell their homes, their cars, everything they have and will move in with another family in order to try to keep their child or their family member on a drug that they don't know if they'll have the next day. It really runs the gamut with effort, different types of effort, and different dangerous, sometimes attempts at accessing the drug. It's very sad. And we just try to do whatever we can as an organization to make sure they can see their options with a company.
I think it's well documented, and we probably are all familiar with those stories of people having huge financial impact selling homes. But actually, that's quite shocking to me to hear. And it's the first time I've heard that verbalized, families actually having to criminalize themselves in a desperate attempt to access medication. I think that's quite a leveling thought, isn't it? You know, it's horrific enough to lose your job and to things, but to actually feel that desperate that, you know, otherwise law-abiding citizens would feel that that's their only route. You know, that's a really stark thing.
To them, the benefit outweighs the risk.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely. Certainly a very stark thing to dwell on there. In terms of appreciation of the pathways and the routes, do you feel that patients with rare diseases understand that? Do they know how to get onto these pathways? Obviously, in your community, they're very well informed, but do you think that's typical, or do you think there are lots of people that just don't know how to get into this process?
You know, I think there's, you know, we always like to say there's 11 ways to show somebody how to do something or to send the information, but sometimes these other areas of the world, they are not plugged in no matter how many times you try to communicate it. And so they don't see the pathway very clearly. And it's really on us to try so hard to connect to the clinicians and to the patients around the world so that we can always distribute information. But it is not lost on us that patients don't always get that. And so if they don't even know that there is a pathway, they may be, you know, criminalizing themselves without need. There may be opportunity and they just don't know it, and they don't know where to look. And as we find, you know, the internet is a wonderful blessing, but in the same aspect, not every country has access to these, or, you know, they don't have the money to pay to have access. So it's really, that's where it becomes important to really seek out and find the clinicians who can spearhead the communication and the information to you and to the company.
Yeah, thank you. And Dave, if I can end on with you on a final question, how can patients be educated about EAPs and how they work, and what needs to be put in place? You know, from your perspective as a patient advocacy officer, how do we get to the point where they have access to that and we're not seeing these situations of people criminalizing themselves and not knowing where to turn?
Well, you know, as been mentioned by Professor Dawn and Roberta, obviously working with the patient organization on your specific disease and really reach out them to see. Also the HCP, I mean, the HCP sometimes has a contact into the biopharma company to try to figure out, is anything being done? Can something be done about that? Don't be afraid to reach out to a company. If you hear that a company is working in that disease space, reach out to that company. And as they said, you have to keep going. Don't just send one email, one text, whatever. I mean, you really need to reach out and contact. There are also some of the umbrella organizations, such as NORD, Eurordis, CORD, the Canadian Organization of Rare Disorders, that have ways, Global Genes, that they may have connections, not only information on their website, if they have access, as Roberta said, but also the way that you can reach out to them, because they have contact to sort of connect with the pharmaceutical company. And even some of the regulatory, as I mentioned earlier, some of the regulatory bodies may have some information. You know, always check their websites, the clinicaltrials.gov in Europe, the clinical trials registry, just to see if something was listed, because it does have to be listed for an EAP program. And you know, the thing is, don't be afraid to use the different words. I mean, sometimes people may hear expanded access, compassionate use, expanded compassion. You know, use all the words, all the terminology to really get a sense of what's going on out there, and if there's a program set up. And as we've talked here, you know, it is complicated. And as Dawn said, sometimes it takes 18 months. It takes time, unfortunately, but usually if you just keep after people, their hearts are in the right position. It's just making sure how those dots are connected.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Dave. Becky, can you share the results from our last poll on real world evidence? Oh, great. 91% for me. That's encouraging. I think it should be a standard practice. So fantastic. Thank you very much. So last poll before we go to questions. Do you want to pop that up for us, Becky? How useful have you found this discussion in growing your understanding of the knowledge of the topic? It's been really fascinating. I think I've certainly, I've personally learned a lot. And I think it's really great to hear everyone kind of bouncing their thoughts off of each other. So thank you. While that goes on, I'm going to see if I can get into the questions. Looks like we've had quite a few questions. So let's see. Oh, fantastic. So 83% think very helpful. Yeah, up to 86. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Great. That's what we like to see. Okay, let me just have a look through these questions. Do you feel there is a need to be a new strategy for the very likely long-term recession closing in that will further offset the limited access for low-income patients experience, leading to poor prognosis, quality of life for existing and marginalised groups? Great question. Obviously, global events may well be taking us down a particular route. Does anyone want to pick up that question? Maybe it might be one for you, John, perhaps.
But I think, there's a lot of factors going on right now in the world in terms of things like recession and impact on patient and patient communities. I think part of it comes down to the expectations that, where companies can, I think they're making the effort to do that. But I think it is important, not just, we talked earlier about developing countries, but even in countries where, medicines are more widely available, and thinking about different strategies and different approaches for those particular patients. I mean, I'm not speaking on behalf of all pharmaceutical companies, but certainly, they're still having some of the same challenges. But again, I think it is something, worth considering.
Yeah.
Can I add to that, as far as patient advocacy organizations, we have the ability to create wonderful programs that can help in this situation. That's financial assistance, that's holiday programs, that's college scholarships. These are the key times right now to be implementing those so that you're helping these patients get a leg up, but also maybe offsetting some of the problems in access to medication by helping them afford some of the medications or afford the travel to get to the clinical, areas down the road. I think these are key programs that can really help in these situations.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
And I also wanted to say, don't be afraid to ask. I mean, sometimes there's some hesitation. Obviously, in the rare disease world, you find that people are afraid to ask, which is fabulous. But don't be afraid to ask. Ask all the different entities that I mentioned earlier, because there are, everybody's trying to figure out a way. How can this happen? How can we get the medication, get the anything in the standard access to patient. Yeah.
Absolutely, thank you. Another really great question here. I think perhaps maybe one for John and Dawn, but see who thinks they want to pick it up. So I'm curious about the group's opinions are regarding publicising the existence of an access programme for a specific product. It seems in the best interest of patients and physicians to know about such programmes, but companies and some regulators view publicising programmes as a promotion of an unhappy therapy.
So
unapproved therapy, I should say, promotion of unapproved therapy.
No, and it is one of those that it's one of those actions that does sit in the gray zone. You are compliantly able to post that you do have a program. And I have seen it where companies have put out an appropriate documented press release announcing we have opened an expanded access program for such and such drug. But keep it very simple. It's just an announcement. And there is nothing wrong with that, because you are allowed to announce that you have your programs. That is kind of the fundamental backbone to the whole 21st century cures, is let them know you have a program. To the second point of that question, the recruiting, yes. What you don't want to post is, this is all the medical criteria. This is exactly what we're looking for. This is what we couldn't see in the trials, so bring your patients over. That's not what expanded access is about. Again, it's not research, but posting the fact that there is a program that your company is supporting and you are open to accepting requests or applications is something I think is beneficial, not to the company, but beneficial to the patient community, the healthcare community.
Yeah, and to echo that comment, I mean, and Dawn mentioned 21st Century Cures Act. The FDA specifically requires that companies post their EAPs on clinicaltrials.gov because they didn't want to be in a position where they felt like you had to know somebody at the company to be able to get access. They want everybody to know the same information. And so it's really about, appropriate and compliant awareness building about, these programs. And, there are different pathways. Dawn mentioned the website or, information on the website, clinicaltrials.gov. There's other tactics too, but yeah, it's definitely important to figure out ways so that patients will know.
It's one of the reasons I mentioned earlier that I try to find out who their HCP is, because medical to medical can talk about these things. And so really
Absolutely.
connecting the medical side to have discussion and all that, it's a really important part, I think.
Fantastic, thank you. Just one other quick comment here. So someone has said many local doctors are not aware of an EAP and patients usually have to educate them. Yeah, fair response, I think. And maybe if we've got time for one more question, it's a few more, but we'll just do one more now, I think. How do companies decide on new countries where they will offer an EAP? Do patient advocacy organizations guide that, help the decision making on that?
Well, what I can talk about from my experience, I have never been in a situation where I have been limited to which countries we would accept requests from. Just because of the companies that I have worked with believe that it is the patient you don't know who's in the farthest corner of the globe, who will have no other option to that potential treatment. But how would we know that they're there? So you don't just cut off part of the map. But that goes back to the other questions that we were talking about before. Is it going to be easy to get there? Probably not. But does that mean that it kind of goes back to the ethics question as well. I have been fortunate to be in a situation where we have not cut out part of the map and said no. But I don't know if any of our other panelists have other experiences.
No, I agree. The companies that I've worked for, I mean, again, as the requests come in, and that's why it's essential that the medical talk to medical and really try to figure out how we can do it. I mean, we've had instances of Lebanon, and then when they had that explosion, they tried to work through and how, but it's all left on the medical discussion. So, yeah.
And sometimes we've seen certainly in the different companies that I've worked with over the years where companies, there may be limited drug supply. So they may, for instance, limit to, and have certain waves based on when, tied to commercial launches and, when they will have the drug supply available. And so there are different approaches that different companies would take, but it really is, comes down to the company's needs and what's happening there.
Yeah. Great. Some fantastic questions there. There are a few more, but we will endeavour to deal with those afterwards and circulate responses. Just mindful of time and trying to keep to time. I'd really like to give a sincere thanks to all of our panellists today. I found that such an interesting conversation. So big thank you to John, to Dave, to Anib, Famida, Dawn and Roberta, and to Tana Pharma, of course, for partnering with us to facilitate this really important conversation. Thank you so much to everyone for listening and bringing those really great, insightful questions. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have. And as I said, we will feed back responses to those outstanding questions. Becky, I think, is going to perhaps share a slide with some contact details at the end. So please feel free to contact us if you've got any feedback or further questions. And thank you very much to everybody and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Nicola.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.